Um, Welcome, everyone. It's so good to see so many people here. It's really great. Um, to begin with, I'm going to read a statement from the St. Louis Ethical Society, continuing our practice of reading mission statements from other societies and perhaps an effort to maybe sharpen our own at some point. So, from the St. Louis Society, our mission is to inspire ethical living in a humanist-centered congregation by affirming the worth of every person and advocating the primacy of ethical behavior above any religious creed. Our statement of purpose is that we are a diverse, ethics-centered community of caring people dedicated to deed before creed. We believe in bringing out the best in the human spirit, appreciating the uniqueness and worth of every person, treating all with dignity and respect, cultivating a community of people who support each other through the stages of life, raising the quality of all our relationships, acting with reverence and commitment toward the natural world, and working to create a more just, loving, and sustainable world for all. That said, I'd like to formally introduce Curt Collier. He has been the interim leader here at the Bergen Ethical Society since February. He has served 3 ethical societies as St. Louis, Riverdale Yonkers, and the New York Society for over 20 years. He's also a former instructor at the Humanist Institute and is a frequent guest speaker on ethical biocentrism. When not at the Society, Curt is the National Youth Programs Director for Groundwork USA, an environmental organization created by the National Park Service and the EPA. He oversees programs for up to 250 youth each year in 9 national parks and works to provide additional youth programming to 20 cities. He's also a frequent guest speaker for the National Park Service and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on ways to engage diverse audiences within our national parks. Curt is a single father and lives with his son Andy in Norfolk, Virginia, when he's not in New Jersey. So with that, I would like to introduce Curt, but before I do so, I'd like to say, Curt, with that incredible musical selection and with that mission statement from St. Louis, I'd like to hear you explain just how you are not a humanist.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, I'm up to the task. I think it's important that I understand that there may be a vote happening today and determine whether or not you would like for me to be the leader of your community going forward for the next few years. I just told my company I'm leaving after being there for 15 years, and they're all kind of in turmoil. I'm getting messages from across the United States by people trying to drag me back. But I'm committed to this process. My love is ethical culture, and my success within the National Park Service and the activities that we have done there is because of how much I deeply believe in ethical culture and ethical culture processes. I just wanted to kind of do a little bit of background of clarity. People often ask me if I'm a humanist, and I say technically, no, I'm not. Now, I taught at the Humanist Institute. I was one of the signers of the Humanist Manifesto, and of course, was trained as an ethical culture leader. But to me, words matter, and ideas and that they kind of go behind those matter indeed. So I'm just going to give you a little history lesson. This is not normally how I like to do platforms. I like them much more engaged and discussion and things like that. But now with, I could see over 71 logins, which, and there's more in that, I think that's not going to be possible today. So let me just kind of tell you where I am and what I'm thinking about and why I think I'm closer to what Adler had originally envisioned and my desire to kind of return to that. So I'm going to share my screen for just a second so you can see some of these slides that I've kind of thrown together. And I apologize if you hate slides, but it's the only way we can kind of continue to do this. if you go to the American Ethical Union website right now, there is a definition of what is ethical humanism, and they also called, in that first line, ethical humanism, also called ethical culture. And in the minds of many people, there's an equivalency between these two things. That it's a progressive philosophy of life, that there's no supernaturalism, and that we're trying to live lives of personal fulfillment and live lives for our best. And with that, basically what we're trying to do is to figure out how to create meaningfulness in our life and how we should treat one another, and that we should have ethics as a central principle in our lives, and that despite how we may think about things according to this statement here, that there are good and evil and there's right and wrong, and that the best that we think to do is to treat other people with good lives, that love has to prevail, truth must be respected. You can read it all right there. And how to realize these ideals in personal and political relationships and the purpose of the society. I think if I were asked if some of you would sign on to that, a vast majority of you would probably agree with it. You just need to understand that Adler, Felix Adler himself, the founder of ethical culture, for those who don't know, when I mentioned the word Adler, I would have hated that statement. Felix Adler was not a humanist. He's made that very explicit. For example, even the word humanism, even though he knew what that was, does not appear in an ethical philosophy of life, which is his most important text. He never used the word humanism. He never described himself as a humanist. And as my predecessor and my mentor, Dr. Joseph Schumann, taught and wrote here, that Adler died in the year in which the Humanist Manifesto was published, but he lived long enough to see its appearance. They actually came to Adler and asked him to sign the Humanist Manifesto. Not only did he refuse to sign it, he also forbade other ethical culture leaders from doing so. And Vivian Thayer, who was then the director of the ethical culture schools, did sign it. And this was hidden from Felix Adler because they thought it would send him over the edge. And of course, he died a short time later, not because the Humanist Manifesto came out, but because he was probably dying of stomach cancer. So this was a guy who never thought of himself as a humanist. And just to kind of understand, for some people, the reason why he didn't do that is because of what Adler's idea or philosophy was based on and where humanism was kind of going. And there were kind of two schools of camps in the 1930s that kind of people based their ideas. One was Adler's 19th century neo-Kantian idealism. He basically believed that we have a capacity to notice moral conflicts. The reason why we feel disgust and the reason why we strive as humans to create just ethical systems is that somehow nature or the universe has pre-wired our brain to do so. The fact that we could pay attention to ethical content rather than just being background noise, like the most of things that we don't see in UV, we don't, like some species do. We can't hear below 200 hertz like some animals can. We have a range of things that we can see and notice. But one of the things we do notice, like just in the Sam Cooke video, is injustice, and we strive for morality. We create religions and all this kind of stuff that somehow Kant argued and Adler kind of agreed with, that we're pre-wired to do that. And that they thought this was just how we were. They weren't really necessarily saying it was because of a God. And that since ethics must be part of the universe, because the rest of life is struggling with these things, we just need a process to discern what it is. This is called idealism in philosophy, for those of you who are widely read on the subject, that kind of what is the notion of goodness in a way exists out there. We're just needing a process for uncovering what it is. It's very different from John Dewey, another philosopher contemporary of Adler's. They were friends. They both worked at Columbia University for a while, who's had his own kind of ideas around naturalism. And this is kind of a quote that knowledge arises from the active adaptation of the human organism to its environment, Dewey said. And so that really it's kind of a process of experimentation that we actively solve human challenges, that all the things that come to us, the wars, the hunger, the things that the atrocities that we do, all of these things are kind of us responding to an environment, and that through kind of active processes, education, reasoning, and insight, and reflection on those things for Dewey, that we could kind of discover what it is those things are, and we could just install those. Now, these appear, pretty close to each other, and some people think that we're kind of splitting hairs here a little bit. But humanism also had a very particular institutional focus as well. You got to remember that the Bergen County Ethical Society, misspelled there, sorry, played a central role actually in ethical culture's connection to humanism. The reason being is that man there, Howard Radis, some of you knew him, doing well. I loved the guy, thought he was great. He was one of my mentors as well. Pretty brilliant kind of guy. He was the first leader of the Bergen County Ethical Society from 1956 to 1964. And I'm sure a lot of you knew him. He passed away, oh God, it's been what, 10 years now? Some of you can help me with that. But lovely man, very, very smart, very dedicated to our process as well. When he left the Bergen County for the Ethical Society, he became the executive director of the American Ethical Union. And it's really there that he began to reach out to the American Humanist Association to try and connect ethical culture with the humanist movement. And he wrote extensively about this, he wrote pamphlets. He knew that not all his colleagues agreed to that. He knew that Adler would be mortified, but he thought that was really the direction that we needed to go in this coalition building of trying to kind of make connections with the humanist community as he saw it. He was also one of the editors of the Humanist magazine. He was on their editorial board, and he with Sherwin Wine and several others, they founded the Humanist Institute, and that's how I came to know Dr. Radis, is that he also served as its dean. And so part of this was kind of the Bergen Society's early connection to humanism, to bringing in these ideas. I saw through his writing that he began speaking of humanist connections even while he was serving at the Ethical Society there, and that this is something he continued to do, is building a connection to a movement that was not exactly Adler's movement. He was just building relationships, and other people like Algernon Black, that I'm sure many of you knew and remember, continued to kind of push that connection deeper and deeper. Now, let's just though think about what was Adler's central process, and to a certain extent, yeah, we're no longer 18th or 19th century idealists, but Adler was, as I often say, had no roadmap before him. This was a young man. He was on his own. There was nobody out there who was trying to do what he's doing. He was trying to do his best. And Adler had what he thought was a process, that what ethical culture was not a set of beliefs. We were not just out there to push the liberal agenda and saying that this is how we should all be in the world, that we should build democracies and all this kind of stuff. He believed deeply in all those things, but he thought that life would always be something more. Ethics would always be something more, that we didn't want to say what ethics was at one time in human history, because it's always changed. And as we look back, what people thought was moral and good and right in the past is certainly radically different than what we think it is today. And that's going to be true of the future when generations from going forward look back at us and say, wow, they did all these things and they thought they were being ethical. Adler thought that ethics was something that emerged through a process, and it was a continual thing. It wasn't just a set of agenda or beliefs, that something was emerging. What he thought is that each of us, each of you on this phone call, if I were to hand you before you an ethical conflict, you would have some unique ideas and experiences because of who you are, because of your own unique background and experiences, the cool things that you've done, the struggles that you have, raising the children, the jobs, the careers, all these things you've literally have, Adler said, touched the stuff of life. And therefore, each of you has unique insights about that. And the best that any of us could ever do is that time when we can turn to another and bring out life in front of them. We see this in literature and movies and song titles, how people who we never even suspected can actually turn to another person and bring out their best as well, and forget themselves temporarily and try to just create the best for others. And Adler thought that that was the wellspring of ethics, that it was this way that we engaged each other in this conversations that we had, and that we should continue to do that, to act to bring out those others' capacities. Because that person who you've worked with and struggled with and mentored and argued with and listened to, eventually they have the process of doing this to another as well. And that we could keep bringing out this life affirming force, kind of Adler said and others, to figure out what life was all about. And we're all touching this thing, and this thing would continue to develop and bring out a culture. So really, what's the difference? I mean, to a certain extent, we could argue that we're splitting hairs. Ethical culture has always just been a process through what Adler called right relationships, that we need a better understanding of how life flourishes and grows. That was the thing he always wanted to know. What does it mean to be good? What do we know about life? And that life itself is going to give us that answer. And it's not just from studying it as a subject, but actually entering into relationships with the other and struggling in this thing to figure out what those things are. And that these things can shape the broader culture, that when we learn what it means for human dignity, what worth looks like, what our understandings are, that then we then take these ideas and we push them into the broader culture. We were to be a society for an ethical culture, Adler thought, that we're continuing to create the institutions, not to tell people how to live, which is what he didn't do, but to give them the control of their own lives, but also to get them to participate in the stuff of life and have those ideas. So his focus was entirely on engagement with others to answer the ever-evolving questions of how shall we live. That was what Adler was really doing. To a certain extent, ethical humanism has continued this project. It's just also that through an active investigation, we arrive at a set of ideas, kind of the progressive agenda, we may call it, which leads to a kind of a personal fulfillment and to the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Humanism could be said as a form of utilitarianism, that we're always trying to create the best society for the best number of people. And so, and a focus is also how do we treat others as well. But that the ultimate aim is to live the good life, to discover this through experiment and reason, and treat others as ends in themselves rather than means and end. But the focus is on that living that good life to the best of our knowledge and affording others the same. And if I go back to that original description, I think the thing that would have upset Adler is that the only way he thought that we could arrive at the ideals of ethics, whatever you want to call it, ethical humanism or ethical culture, is that through moral engagement. It could not be separate or excluded from that, and that we have to just kind of bring ourselves to engage in the stuff of life. Now, the only part where I differ from Adler, and the reason why I'm not a humanist but a biocentrism, also makes for some of you sound like I'm splitting hairs. But what I try to do is take Felix Adler's ideals. And after I left the Humanist Institute, we were working in the Institute, and I have to tell you the story about that. I had a class, I was one of the mentors, a co-leader of the Humanist Institute. In fact, Ann Clayson, the current leader of the past leader of the Ethical Society of St. Louis, was a member. And I remember going to the board there and saying, listen, there are a lot of really great books here on humanism, but not a lot of books on how to build community. And that really, what our classmates are asking us for, and they came to us saying, how do you engage others? What do relationships look like? Rather than here are the set of things that humanists believe. And the board rejected my appeal. They said, listen, we're not interested in that. Here's the core books of the ethical humanists. These are the ones approved. And really, and I was told this, that if I wanted to know how to build communities, maybe I should just tell them to go get a degree at a business school. And I thought, wow, that's kind of a weird thing to say. I left the Humanist Institute after trying for a year, and our students saying, you're not giving us what we want. We want to know how to build authentic community. And the Humanist Institute was telling me no. We left. We were the one class that did not complete that process. And we formed our own training. We got a bunch of different books, and we continued their process of education and gave them their own certifications, because at that time, the Humanist Institute wasn't tied to anything else. But as I continued to do that after I left there, I thought about what is the power of communities? What is the power of life? What does life tell us? And what do we need to do? And that has taken me into environmentalism, of thinking about what sustains all of us. What do we need to flourish? It's not just the ideas that we need clean air, we need clean water, we need spaces for our kids, we need a place for the planet to continue to grow and flourish, and we're losing that. So what is biocentrism? This is the kind of thing formulated from Aldo Leopold, but which I've kind of shaped through Felix Adler, is that we need an ethic which is no longer just about us. The problem with, for me and for some biocentrists, about humanism is if it's only about us, and the environment is something we do on the side because we think it's something we should be good about. That is not exactly what we want. That the ethics, the struggle has to be with the rest of life as well. That we need to understand how much we need the rest of nature. And we need an ethic that deals with climate change, which is going to be the biggest thing that's going to happen to our children. And that this needs to be part of the conversation. How does life flourish? And what are all these ways in which life is not flourishing? And we also need an ethical culture process. I would take Adler's ideas and I would use them to elicit the unique insights of the rest of nature that has been kind of doing this process for the last 4.5 billion years. That life knows something about what it needs to flourish, not just humans, that all of us working together with that can do. Ethical biocentrism, I would also argue, just like ethical humanism, is an ethical culture. You can choose any one you want. I don't believe it. I believe in deeds before creeds, which I'm sure most of you do as well. But it's also to try and bring in the science of biocentrism, of the science of emergence, the physics of that things, and the teleonomic rather than teleological ends. Life is not working towards a goal. Life is just striving to flourish. All of us too. We want to grow, we want to change, we want to find a place which we can all survive, and that we're all trying to live in the best ways we can to do this. And other life is doing that as well, and we need to include them as a biocentrist in that process. So what is biocentrism defined? In my book, it's to use our unique human capacity both for building relationships and for reasoning, the things that we are. We have this gift of relationships that other animals don't have in the same way we do. We can reflect on them, and we have a power. We have the power of our mind and our ability to use reason, and that we need to engage others and to elicit their ability to grow and flourish, whether it's the person who's living down the street from us, our family or friends, or remote, but also the rest of life as well. That we need to use these insights gleaned from these experiences to build an ethical culture, which is almost like a biome, I think Adler was trying to get to, this system that allows all of this process to continue to expand and for more life to flourish, and to be able to know and have intelligence about what this is, and that this process for Adler never ended, and thus to create the conditions of a more complex, resilient, and sustainable processes to emerge that are transformative to all of us. That we do not have as humans a resilient system. We do not even have one that's a sustainable system. We have accomplished so much of what we have accomplished at the expense of the rest of being, and an ethical focus can no longer do that. We have to accomplish group goals together so that both we as humans and other species can continue to flow, to flourish. And finally, I want to just flow with that life, to figure out what is that pulse, that unique thing, and to kind of share in the adventure to see where it can lead. So what that might look like? People will say, give me examples of how that might continue. To a certain extent, things will look very much the same, what we do at the Ethical Society. You've been doing a lot of these things for a long period of time. What I bring is some unique insights as an ethical culture leader and environmentalist for 15 years. That one thing is that we do continue to actively work to protect, and to affirm the worth and dignity of all of life, to make sure that, there's this pro-life movement in America, which is not has nothing to do with that we really need to reclaim what it means to be pro-life, to affirm the worth and dignity, not just for ourselves, but for the rest of being, for as well, and to create places where we can flourish. that's going to depend on us deepening our human relational capacity. That's one of our unique gifts, not only our intelligence, but our relational capacity. We can connect, we can feel things, and that we can use those ideas to kind of improve our world as well. But that also it needs to increase our capacity to reason, to think about those things. I will never be able to understand what that American robin sitting in that American holly, those two native species there, really want from life, unless I can also use the knowledge and insights of science to help me to understand that as well. But also that I need the arts and the humanities to communicate these shared insights. The problem is that these things are difficult to understand, and the way that we connect, part of what we need is art. We need more of it. We need more of the humanities, and to help interpret and help us think and help us have experiences that we can bring about these shared insights. That we need to advance greater participatory democracy and advance human and non-human rights. That really democracy has always been about the ever advance of rights, and we need to think about what are the rights of the rest of being as well, for us and for others, the other, the radical other that's different from that, and to move that forward. That we also need to work for autonomy and freedom ideas and freedom of expression, that each unique person has a right to kind of be their best, including the right to exist, to have a home, to have the resources for health, and to grow and to flourish, and a place for their kids to educate, just like those birds in the tree. And just like us in our neighborhoods, we need to create spaces where life can continue to flourish. That it need to fight for inclusivity of all being. That's how a meadow works. It's not a monoculture. It's a collection of all these things working together, and to uphold the importance of diversity and how that all can work together. To enhance communication, the sharing of ideas and needs, to foster conditions that advance reciprocity, which is Adler's central ideal, and that we're interdependent, and we are interdependent on all of being. And how can we do that as a people who push not only for autonomy and freedom, but also that drive within us to connect with another. And finally, what I'd love to see at the Bergen Ethical Society, just as you were with humanism, that it's a center which teaches all of that above, which creates working models, which is the other thing I'd love to do. How do we build models? How can we demonstrate these things rather than just talking about them? The time for the talking is stopping. Let's demonstrate these models, how things can and come about, and that we educate the next generation for the skills needed to do this effectively. So this is kind of why I often say that my focus is as a biocentrist, why I find these things so important. I think it's a big adventure. And I think the Bergen County for Ethical Society, the reason I hope we chose each other is I think we still have some cool things to say to the world, that we can become that center of training for biocentrism as well as humanism. And we could see how far these things would go. And I hope you're as excited about that as I am. Thank you very much.
Curt, thank you very much for clarifying why you're not a humanist, and for leaving me in a little bit of doubt about that. It seems to me, I just want to kick off the reflections on what you've said with one observation. I see in the chat that there's a lot of puzzlement over Felix Adler's forbidding other leaders to sign on to the Humanist Manifesto, and people are a little critical. I'd just like to suggest that in this wider, bigger view, more inclusive definition of ethical culture that you've given us, and which I think personally is very welcome, there's still room for the small. There's still room for the view, for the micro view. And one of the things that I think is so good about ethical culture, no matter how you define it, is that it serves as a good guide, a map, a roadmap for relationships with each other. And in that, there certainly is room for forgiveness, even for someone like Felix Adler. So I think that we can bring ourselves to forgive Felix Adler lying on his deathbed for forbidding his followers from signing on to a humanist manifesto. And if not forgive it, just overlook it. And if we're called upon to forgive someone like Felix Adler, there's a lot of room for forgiveness. We could all use it from time to time. And with that, I would like to invite others to share their own reflections and insights based on Curt's talk today.
Eric, you had your hand up.
Do, thank you. And wonderful talk, Curt. And I've heard you touch on some of these themes before, and I really appreciate how you've brought so many things together in today's talk. And I just want to have a sort of one focus that occurs to me as I look at some of what or listen to what you're saying. And that's really just on in terms of our relationship with government, as it were. Whether it's local government or national government. Because what it sounds to me, what I hear within what you're saying is somewhat the anarchist ideal of do what you will is the whole of the law. That is to say, when everyone is thriving and flourishing and we're all in proper relationship with each other and with nature, then really what's government to do? There's nothing left for it to do. But currently, obviously, we're not at that place. And so I'm wondering what's the proper role and relationship with structures of governance as opposed to the social structures that we create within ethical culture. Because I want to say finally, because sometimes it seems to me in our social action, we become the religious wing of the Democratic Party, just as the evangelicals may sometimes be seen as the religious wing of the Republican Party. And so I want to make sure we're clear, that I'm clear, or that I hear your thoughts on this difference between how we interact with government and as social. Thank you.
Great. And of course, being like Adler, I'm a big believer in building institutions, including institutional democracy and community, which is my first effort. Marianne, or Orion, you're muted. There you go.
Actually, it's me.
Okay, go ahead, Orion.
So I loved your talk. I've been a big proponent of human species as a part of our ecosystem, and that we need to really learn much better how to coexist and protect Mother Earth. To that extent, I got this issue of the Hightower Lowdown, and it talks about a concept called the rights of nature as a legal construct that allows lawyers to step in and protect rivers and water systems and trees and plants and prevent them from being exploited by corporate interests and others who are not sensitive to the life forms that are there. So it's just something that sort of ties in with everything else you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Orion. Pam, unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you very much. Curt, I always love the way you talk and I love your presentations, but I have a question for you out of curiosity, real curiosity. There are millions of Jews, there are millions of Christians, there are millions of Muslims. Why aren't there millions of ethical culturists or humanists? Why is there a problem of bringing us together? Why can't we find more ethical culturists or humanists as we're talking?
Thank you, Pam. Of course, I think they had a head start on us, but I think we're rapidly gaining ground. So let's hope that continues to be true. We continue to find a way to work together, despite all of our kind of differences. Mark, want to mute yourself, please?
Well, yeah. Well, thanks very much for that enlightening presentation. It seems that a lot of their ideas, I tend to, it's something that I was concerned about too, was extending the ethical and moral, concerns to other sentient beings, not just ecologically, but even in a personal sense, that not to exploit beings, or not to be callous in the way we treat other species, even if it's necessary sometimes, but do it in a mindful way, and in a way that's only necessary for our well-being, and not just to fulfill our appetite. Also, I thought it was interesting the contrast that you brought up between the Kantian and the Deweyan, the dichotomy, and I think that's pretty important, because I think Kant, I don't know how many people are familiar with Kant, but his critique of practical reason and his whole philosophy was based upon this, trying to reconcile empiricism with rationalism, and the idea that we have a priori categories of understanding, that our ethics and morals come, like you were saying, from something that's more hardwired, or asking certain questions that aren't just based upon empirical investigations, as opposed to just using reason. Because Kant's whole point was, we can't know appearances, or we can only know appearances, but there are certain things we can maybe know through reason, but not just through appearances. And it seems like Dewey's idea was that it's through using reason and adapting to using experience and reason, rather than intuition and more introspection and the idea of relationship. So I like the way the relationship, it's very important to inform reason, and that we can't just use reason in isolation from our intuition. And I think that the road that you're talking about puts an equal or a very important emphasis on intuition and the idea of this natural capacity, and not just making it on too analytical. I really enjoyed that, and so good luck with that.
Thank you all. Once again, this is an ongoing conversation, whereas we each try to kind of figure out how we want to live and where we want to go. But I end my little talk with kind of three more slides, if you could just give me. I actually approach these things, I'm always thinking as an educator working with youth and with others, is how do we explain what it is that we all kind of hope for. And I'd like to, one of the things I do, of course, is I'm a big fan of the philosophy, and of course the philosophy of art is something. I'd like to show you 3 slides to kind of show you a transitions to kind of get a little bit more of what I'm talking about. 1 second here, and share my screen again one more time. And make that a little bit bigger. Hope you can all see that. This, of course, is the Lamentations from Giotto in 1305. And what's interesting about this kind of piece of art, if you take a look at it, is that this is a humanity coming and emerging out of the dark ages, we call it, the period when kind of art and many kinds of forms of human enjoyment were suppressed, because we thought that we all should just be preparing ourselves for the imminent return of somebody who's going to take us off, and nothing else really mattered. And you can always spot a painting that happens before the 1400s, with but rare exceptions in the West, that often don't look like this. This is a very good view of this. And the thing about Giotto's painting is, the first thing is, you notice that there is no perspective. It's all on one line. It's unidimensional, because the central thing that we're supposed to just look for is the lamentation of Mary over Jesus. The background, there is no kind of greenery other than a almost bare tree. And part of that is that we can learn nothing from the natural world and had nothing to teach us. And that only thing we needed to do was to focus on this. The kind of a different group of people we also call humanists, the Italian humanists, though, began to say that perhaps, though, that the world, the physical world, can teach us some things as well, that unfortunately we've been waiting for 1400 years and Jesus hasn't come back yet. Maybe we ought to need to figure out how to move. And people began to look at the physical world in new ways, which kind of led us to kind of this painting from Raphael about a little over 200 years later. By this point, humanists are beginning to experiment with a new art technique called lines of perspective. And you can actually see them in this painting of Raphael, the lines that kind of pull us in and actually pull us back onto the planet. That life is not one unidimensional thing, that we need to engage with it. And as we see, as our eye gets pulled back, we can also see that humans can do some pretty great things, like this beautiful structure in the background. And if you look, there now are trees, things like that are beginning to happen. In fact, I'll give you a little cheat. And if you ever want to walk with me to the Museum of Natural History, I can get you to spot the age of any painting. But in the 1400s, when these kind of lines of perspective were brought in, that was the idea that maybe the world is not a bad thing, that the world can also be a teacher to us, and that we can learn something from it in addition to kind of our own religious ideals. And finally, by the time we get to John Wright's painting here in the 1700s, during the Age of Enlightenment, we see how much we have gone now to engage ourselves in the world. This is kind of a, excuse me, let me go back. Hold on one second. I think I lost you 1 second. So I get for touching the screen, you know, they never tell me to do that. Okay, there we go. Can you see the painting again? Hopefully some of you nod your head. Jim, can you see this painting from John Wright? There you go. I can only see like 3 of you. But once again, this is an experiment called bird and the air pump. You can see a bird they put inside of a bell jar and pump the air out, and the bird is floating around. They just want to show that how air lifts up the wings. But the different expressions of the humans in the room, everything from wonder and amazement to horror, to all of these things. And even the shift of light has occurred. The light is no longer stringing down from the heavens, but is coming up from above, kind of the clear light of reason, of human understanding. But we also see that in the background, there is still the light of the moon, that the world is still out there. And to me, what's great about John Wright's painting is that we don't want to lose the perspective of the rest of humanity. In a way, we've all been experimenting, and scientists are trying to figure out what is the meaning of life. I don't mean this as cruel as this painting is, but we tried to figure it out. But the rest of life has always been out there also saying, hey, you want to know about what all of life is? We'd be happy to participate in it as well. And so that's the kind of insights I'd like to bring back to the Bergen Society, back into ethical culture to the extent I can. Thank you very much. With that, we're going to have some announcements. I'm going to turn it over to Jim to kind of lead the announcements and talk about what's happening this afternoon, and to call for other announcements as well. Jim?